When people casually compare modern life to slavery, they usually only mean it in the way of feeling trapped. And a lot of people do feel like their life consists of long working hours, limited options, a pressure to make ends meet, and the sense that ultimately someone else controls their time. Now, of course, people are aware that they aren't literally the same as slaves, but I think their concerns are more about which aspects are still similar to slavery, and also whether the common man is slowly turning into a slave through governments trying to impose more control, which is exactly what I want to talk about in this video. So to understand what is similar and what is not, I think we should understand what slavery actually was, how it began, and what it actually meant in the objective, legal, and daily life terms. Modern radicalized slavery in the Americas did not begin in the 1800s, but in the 1500s, as European empires expanded into the Americas and needed massive amounts of labor to extract wealth from land they had just taken. The indigenous populations were killed off by disease and warfare, and the settlers lacked the labor force required to run plantations that would produce sugar, tobacco, cotton, and coffee. So enslavement of Africans became the solution because it was profitable, scalable, and also legally allowed due to them being unable to resist and counted as not part of Europe, effectively seen as robots. Over time, this system evolved into chattel slavery, where enslaved people were treated as inheritable property. It reached a massive point in the 1800s because there was no longer just an economic system but a fully developed social order enforced by law. Enslaved people could not legally marry, own property, refuse labor, move freely, or claim rights to anything, including themselves. Their children inherited this slave status. Escaping was of course criminalized with severe punishment, on top of the already routine beatings. This is the baseline reality of slavery, which we can use to compare modern people to. So let's begin with an argument that a lot of kids tend to make and discuss modern high school and college students. Their standard life is structured, scheduled, and depending on the school, supervised and heavily enforced. High school students typically spend most weekdays following timetables, completing assignments, and preparing for exams and evaluations. College students have much more autonomy, I'd say, but that is because that is their time to transition into the life of the average worker, and because of this, their academics are now a lot more serious. A lot of them have debt anxiety and uncertainty about the future. What is common across both groups, though, is a lack of control over long-term outcomes. They're expected to comply with systems designed by others, often without any meaningful results besides just grades. So it's rare for them to feel full independence, financial security, or the ability to opt out without consequence. And so emotionally, this can create a lot of those feelings of entrapment and stress, especially in a kid. Which is why, compared to enslaved people in the 1800s, the similarity is almost entirely psychological and not material. Students are obviously not owned, cannot be sold, and retain legal personhood. They can refuse participation, even if doing so carries some social consequences, which even then doesn't take away any rights and still gives them all the options to make money and thrive, just without a college degree, which many say isn't all that important nowadays. I've heard that before, students used to get physically punished to get disciplined, and that some European and third world schools still do that today, but I think most students today wouldn't find that relatable. I've also heard arguments for labor extraction, where in order to get into college, you need volunteering credits, which is effectively forcing you to do free labor. But at some point, students should get work experience even if they don't get paid, and I think there is a big difference between underpaying a student with zero responsibilities and a grown adult with bills to pay. I used to dislike school as a kid for similar reasons because I felt that teachers had too much control over what I could do, and specifically could take away my phone, which I remember really would upset me because I needed it to call my parents. But objectively speaking, school is just outsourced parenting, which is not like slavery in any way, and has existed without issues for literal generations. On a scale of objective similarity to slavery, their situation scores a 1 out of 10. Minimum wage workers, on the other hand, immediately experience a much more real version of constraint. Their standard life often involves long or unpredictable hours, physically demanding and repetitive work, and income that feels like it barely covers even basic needs. Many live paycheck to paycheck with pretty much no ability to save, take time off, or handle potential emergencies, which obviously don't come up often, but it's just that extra baggage in the back of their mind which is there every day. Many feel like there's no financial breathing room and no ability to bargain with their job or boss, which means no ability to refuse poor working conditions without risking being homeless or hungry, which on paper sounds insanely similar to slavery. So let's talk about the objective comparisons. Minimum wage workers are still legally free, but do have narrow choices. They are allowed to move or quit their jobs, but living paycheck to paycheck makes this basically an impossible decision. It's like that illusion of choice meme, and it's why many people genuinely believe minimum wage to be slavery. And of course, they have human rights and their children aren't forced to follow in their footsteps, but I think everyone sees that as an obvious and not something to be happy about. And the biggest difference here, in my eyes, is that although difficult, you are able to climb out of minimum wage jobs by either working your way up the corporate ladder or trying to start some sort of business on the side, both which have been done many times by many people. So on a similarity scale, I'd rate this about a 5 out of 10. The pressure is there, and it feels like slavery in the sense of forced labor, but this is just a structure of how the world works, and people are given tons of real chances to improve their situation to really nobody else's benefit, something slavery never did. The well-paid employees experience a much more stable version of this. Their standard life still includes long hours, high expectations, and some stress, but now without the stress of living paycheck by paycheck or being unable to afford things like healthcare. They also have more money to invest into either some business idea or investment accounts, which gives them their stability for the future. And to them, work is just something they have to do daily, but everything else feels much more in their control, which is why a lot of these people tend to talk more about finding their purpose or how bored they are, and less about the minimum wage struggle. As such, the slave overlap is minimal. These people participate in the system they can leave or have an easier time reshaping. But now with their income and the ability to invest, they are much more similar to a business owner than just a worker. So I'll say similarity to slavery is a 2 or 3 out of 10. Because contributing to the world is just something everyone must do, and while they don't have total control, they have enough of it to work towards getting more. Self-employed individuals are often seen as the most free, but their lives also frequently involve instability, long hours, and the constant risk. And I don't mean necessarily gig workers, but people who get paid from choosing where to place their efforts. So someone like a professional boxer who chooses when to fight, but relies on money from these fights. It's a 50-50 where they can both benefit, but also risk losing a lot. Compared to enslaved people, there is a big contrast. Self-employed people own their labor and its output. Sure, they may be pressured by markets, but who isn't? And no one owns them nor forces them to do specific things. Their work, even if stressful, is fully up to their planning and their action, which is especially true when it's done by someone who already may have a job on the side or some money saved. As such, I'd argue it places them 1 out of 10 on the similarity scale. Wealthy people experience a fundamentally different reality, not just to slaves, but even the people of today. Even their casual life includes control over time, access to resources, legal protections, and at a point, political influence. They are on the opposite end where for them, it's hard to experience not being in control over their life. Now, a lot of rich people, I would argue, still tend to be slaves to their work, where they work for the sake of doing it. They have money, but now it's more about wanting to feel productive, so they still end up wasting their time, when instead they could be using that money to do bigger things. But that is just nitpicking the intentionally dense rich people. There are a lot of people who are both rich and smart, and due to this have literally full control and say in what they want to do. In relation to slavery, the similarity is a 0 out of 10. The last group of people I wanted to talk about won't be relatable to most of you, hopefully, but they are who I'd consider closest to modern slaves. Immigrant laborers and exploited foreign workers, particularly under systems like the kafala sponsorship system in places like Dubai. These people actually don't have a foundation to lean onto, dealing with confiscated passports, restricted movement, a lot of debt, unsafe working conditions, and threats of deportation. Previous slavery existed because they could easily produce a ton of value in forms of cotton and the other things I mentioned. And currently this is being used to mass produce things like phones, which many are aware of, but also a lot of the rich places like Dubai. The system basically treats migrants as indebted to the land, having them work and earn rights over time. Objectively better than slavery, but obviously worse than the modern working conditions of the West. However, they are provided with food, clothing, shelter, and other essentials, so I would say it's very similar to a minimum wage worker experience, just without any chances to change jobs or start some business or side gig. This system has been critiqued a lot and does replicate many of the functional elements of slavery. Again, control over movement, coercion through debt, and violence or threat thereof are present. On a similarity scale, I would put this at a 7 or 8 out of 10, depending on its severity. Objectively, I would say 8, but as weird as it may sound, I feel like having zero control over the work you have to do, as in you're just told what to do, might be mentally not as bad as being a minimum wage worker who has to try and make their own decisions. Obviously, there's still a reason why I placed the worker 3 points lower, but that is just something interesting to think about. So in general, the similarity of the 1800s and modern times, as I see it, is that exploitation exists for people who are going through a low period of life and don't feel as though they can fight back. So they produce thousands or millions of dollars worth of value while getting paid effectively nothing. What people misunderstand, I think, about the past is the idea that slavery was simply hard work without pay, when it was a total control over a person's existence. The idea of repaying your debt over time and being offered basic necessities was actually a thing back then, so a number of slaves were able to work their way into getting more rights and control over their situation. But the biggest misunderstanding that I see people make is assuming that having to work is equivalent to slavery, while turning a blind eye to the people currently building mansions and getting paid pennies. I'd be interested for you to leave a comment and talk about which one of these you are, hopefully not the 1800 slave, and in general whether you have any opinions on this topic or disagreements of what I've talked about. Let me know everything, and if you do want to see similar cool videos, I know everyone says this, but things like likes and shares actually do a surprising lot for smaller channels, so do consider that. But I hope this was an enjoyable video, and thank you for watching.